quite a lot about what God has done amongst the nationals or the native people of Honduras. Tonight, we're going to tell you what he has done amongst the foreigners. Now you must understand, once you go out of the United States and into another country, you are a foreigner. So therefore, you better take notice of the laws for foreigners in other countries. They're not just the same as they are here. And we are going to tell you about 2 Americans and an Englishman. It matters not who they are, where they live, from what nationality they are. God has only one way of saving man. But the experiences of each one and God's dealings with all are not altogether the same. They're very different. Now, these 3 that we're going to tell you about, 2 Americans, well, the first one, I don't know much about him. I never had the pleasure of meeting with him. The deadly machete had done its work before even I got to that length. Well then, the other American and the Irishman had some experiences. And at least in the experience of the American, God used that to bring him to a knowledge of sins forgiven. Now I must explain first of all that this man's name was Mr. Marston. Now, why they called him Mr. Marston, I do not exactly know. You always get your name like my name, Don Juan, Don Guillermo, Don Rafael. But for some reason, he always got the name of Mr. Perhaps it's because he was a real gentleman. There is no doubt about that. And he had been in the country for a long, long time. The incident from which I am interested in the moment took place around 1930, or a little later. However, he had been in the country so long, and he was liked with many people, and of course, as we explained before, you never know what work they're going to give you. He was made chief of police in the city of La Ceiba. There he was for many years, and he of course was greatly liked in many ways because he was a very upright man, and he carried out justice at the same time. Let me explain too that at that time, in the 1930s, the fruit companies encouraged others to grow fruit and sell it to them. So these 3 made a little company amongst themselves, the 2 Americans and the Irishman. And they went out into no man's land. That means to say they went to a place where there was no population. The ground was virgin. No one was working it. So they staked out a certain amount of earth or territory. And they claimed that and got it registered with the government. So therefore they started in to grow bananas. Now the first thing that you have to do is to clear the ground. The ground is virgin, tropical growth, trees, and everything else. So that's what they started to do. Of course, shelter was needed to protect them from the hot tropical sun and the torrential tropical rains. No sooner had they this shack in order when a band of men came along looking for work. They were inquiring in which direction they should go to Puerto Cortes or Puerto Castilla so that they could find work. Well, Mr. Marston told them they need go no further. They could find work right there. So about from 15 to 20 men started in. Now, it was necessary to, down there to eat as well as up here. But it's a little different. There are no stores to go to. And of course, there was nothing planted around there. So it was necessary to bring the food from other places. Now, the train came twice a week from the end of their center, which was in Seco. Now you don't go by miles down there, you go by hours. How many hours it takes you to go to a certain place. Now it took about 6 hours from where they were located to get to the end of the railroad tracks. And the railroad brought in food and provisions twice a week. Now it was necessary and customary for one of these three men to make that trip down to the train to bring home the provisions that were necessary. Black beans and rice and corn to make their tortillas and coffee and what else. So they took turns to go. On this particular day, it was old Tom Nestor, the Irishman's turn to go. So he went and he got to Puerto Castillo, or rather Seco, where the train stopped. But somehow the train did not arrive that day. So it was necessary to go back and then come back again. But on this occasion, he decided to stay in Seco and wait for the next train to come along. Eventually the train came. He had his mules there. He got the provision on the mules. He started to go back home again. While he was on the way, of course, it was rather hot and rather unpleasant. The mosquitoes were busy at work, and it was rather hard going. But soon he got nearer the home, or the shack, or whatever you like to call the shelter where they had erected. Now as he came along, he saw something that attracted his attention. It was on the pathway, and as he drew nearer, he wondered what it could be. But as he got nearer, he recognized it was a human being. And he went on until he came near enough to recognize that it was his companion, Mr. Marston. Now, Mr. Marston was lying there covered with blood. There he was with the machete marks all over his body. There he was helpless. So old Tom got busy and cut down some branches, some leaves, and made a shelter to put over his head. and he gave him any water that he had so that he could quench his thirst when he came to. At the same time, he tried to do what he could for the wounds, but that was not much. So there he had to leave him and go on his way to the house to seek help. It goes without saying that Tom put his foot hard down on the accelerator of his old mule. And in no time, they arrived at the house, or their shack. But Tom saw something there he hadn't seen before. There was a guard on the door. The guard was the goat, standing in the open doorway. He made his way in, and what a sight! What a sight he saw. There was his other companion lying on the floor, lying wounded all over, lying in blood. The house was ransacked. The trunks that were supposed to hold the gold were empty. Everything was scattered on the floor. And there old Tom looked at his companion, and soon he was sure that death had taken its toll. He thought, of course, all he had to do was to go, gather the men together, and go out and help old Mr. Marston. But it was not so. So he was the only live one there then. All others had disappeared. His companion was dead. Mr. Marston was lying in pain on the way, so he himself had to start to do something. He made his way back to Mr. Marston's side, taking with him more water and other comforts. Then, of course, on he went, retracing his steps back to Seco. There, of course, he advised the authorities what had happened, made arrangements for the ambulance to come as far as it could on the railroad. Also made arrangements for men with stretchers to come and lift Mr. Marston, bring him back to the railroad. So there he had all the arrangements made and started back himself, very tired, of course. So there he saw his old companion again as he passed by, still breathing. That gave him courage to go on. And now he had to wait the authorities until they would arrive. Being in the land of Mañana, it took some considerable time for Tom's request to be carried out. Yes, and in the meantime he did his best to help Mr. Marston. He went back and forth from their shack to where he was lying, taking some food and water and other clothing and things to make him comfortable. However, it was the ugly but very good friends, the maggots, that took over and saved the situation. Had it not been for them, the doctor said there would be no hope for him. But the maggots kept the infection away and cleaned the flesh around his wounds in such a way that when he eventually got to the hospital in Puerto Castilla, he was not in so very dangerous condition. However, it took about 1 year in the hospital to properly get him on his feet again. The wounds were all over his body. He had lost lots of blood, but with the kindness he found in the hospital, gradually he got better again. This was about the time that we connected him first, as he was convalescent and resting and trying to get his health back again. Of course, my good wife was on the job, and she invited him to come to our home. So he was an often visitor at the house. And during the time that he was there, my wife did all that she could to help him along. And at the same time, many and various were the conversations that we had. And I remember, I never will forget what he said to me one day. After I had spoken to him about the love of God, the wondrous work of the Lord Jesus Christ on the cross for poor, guilty, fallen man, and how men could be saved and their lives changed through believing in him. Well, he said, if I really believed that as you do, I would get onto the housetop, and with all the power I had, I would spread that message far and wide. That's just what I'm doing, I said. Well, the story goes along. He eventually found out that he had been a soldier at one time, and he was eligible for a pension. So he got the pension, which helped him along. Then he removed to San Pedro Sula, or at least he made a visit there. And while he was walking down the street, there was a lady coming up on the same side of the street, and as soon as he got near her, he recognized who she was. And he just stopped and he threw his arms around her. That was his wife. He had been married many years ago to one of the national ladies down there. But as the custom is, with so many things happening, they get separated. And that's what happened to them. They got separated. But now here they were together again, and he started life anew with the wife that he had married long years ago. Mr. Marston's wife had a small but very comfortable house in which the two of them lived happily during their years afterwards. Mr. Marston attended the gospel meetings in the hall in San Pedro Sula. After some time, the great truth of John 3:16 entered his heart. Not only did he think it was a wonderful message, but they made the message to himself. Now that was indeed a wonderful day. Tom Nestor was not so fortunate. He continued with the banana camp. But one night, about 1 o'clock, the man in which he had taken care of things around the house entered with his machete. And very soon, old Tom was all chopped up. The man ran thinking he had killed him. He almost did. But old Tom had the presence of mind to pull a bucket of water near to him. And at the same time, he had strength enough left to pull the wool or cotton out of the mattress to cover up his wounds, stuffing them into the various machete cuts. He was all alone, but remembered he had an engagement with a man to see about a pig on the following Wednesday. That will be about 3 days and a half yet. So he lay there all alone, not able to move, not able to do anything, only take a sip of water once in a while. The day came, the man came to see about the pig, and he saw Mr. Marston in a sad condition. So he went off, which took considerable time, to Seco, to advise the authorities and also to make arrangements for Tom to be taken to the hospital in Puerto Castillo. All that was carried out successfully, but Tom had to lie in the hospital for 13 months. And at the end of 13 months, he was able to get up. Now that was about the time that we contacted him. He was a frequent visitor to our home, and he thought a lot of Doña Nettie. His verdict about her was that she was a wonderful woman, and she would have been a much better woman only for her religion. He was a staunch Roman Catholic, and being an Irish one, he was impossible. The truth could not penetrate. And sad to say, old Tom passed away, as far as I know, as he had lived without Christ. That indeed is very, very sad.